Evan Narcissus here with Richard Garriott, better known to a generation of gamers as Lord British, creator of the Ultima RPG series, here to show us a little bit of Ultima history and a new game that he's working on. So Richard, you've got a box of materials here, show and tell, so let's see what's in there.
Yeah. So I apologize for bringing a pile with me to just something you may have had planned differently for, but you know, it's been 15 years since I've made a fantasy role-playing game. And so I wanted to showcase to people why now is the time for me to come back and make a new role-playing game. And I think it's best illustrated by showing some things of the past. Like for those people who don't know how far back my past goes, you know, I was one of the first players of Dungeons and Dragons in 1974, and I immediately began to write fiction about my D&D campaigns and about Lord British and Mondane the Evil Wizard. And it was one of the rare times that I ever made an A in English, because as you can see by my terrible handwriting, handwriting and spelling would never get me anything. But by creative writing, it was one of the rare A's that I ever made. And then, before personal computers even came out, there were teletypes. And I began to write these games on a teletype that I called D&D 1, D&D 2, D&D 3, etc. And they're literally ASCII codes. There's 8 holes across for each of the ASCII letters. And so this is D&D 1, the first fantasy role-playing game I ever wrote in about 1975-ish. So arguably, probably is the first interactive computer game, role-playing game right here.
Probably. Do you have a machine that runs that still?
I recently bought on eBay a teletype. So in theory, if I could find a PDP-11 to hook it to, maybe so, but unlikely. Then after writing 28 versions on the teletype, in 1977, the Apple II computer came out. And so I wrote D&D 27B, which became Akalabeth. And in fact, the first remark statement in the basic program Akalabeth is D&D 28B. So it's literally just a follow-on to that one. And this game, I was working for the summer at a Computerland store, and the owner said, you really got to publish that. And so I spent $200 on these Ziploc bags and Xerox cover sheets, and I sold 12 of them off the pegboard before one of the pirated copies found its way to California to a publisher called California Pacific, who decided to nationally distribute it, put it in a bigger Ziploc bag,
Wow.
raised the price to $34.95, sold 50,000 copies. My royalties were $5 a unit. Do that math, that's $150,000 for 7 weeks of after-school time.
In 1970?
This is 1980.
1980, wow.
1980. And that was such a good success that's what really said, wow, I ought to do this for a business. And that's what started Ultima. And so Ultima this is the first game I wrote intending it for public consumption. It's the first really complete game of the series. These were all the previous ones were really made just for me and my friends. Right. This began the Ultima series. But almost immediately, since all the other games of this era were simple like asteroids, but not asteroids, called apoloids instead, I was creating virtual worlds. And so I really wanted my game not to be in a Ziploc bag, I wanted it to be in a box. Right. And so the first box in our industry is Ultima 2. And not only did I want it in a box, I wanted things to support the reality of the world we've created. So I wanted cloth maps and fictional manuals and all these things that never confessed it was a game.
Right.
Okay? And that I think also has become important. And things like cloth maps, which I've always done, now you see other people doing cloth maps and trinkets and things too. And of course, all games now come in boxes, or they didn't know, now we're digital download.
Right. Boxes are going to go the way of the dodo bird.
They are. I think they're gone. And that all led up to, by the time we got up to Ultima 9, we had, fictional manuals that always were written as if the world is real. Not only cloth maps and coins and things, but we did this thing we called the Tapestry of Ages, which showed the history of the story of all of the Ultimas, all written out in one big piece of art. And then, of course, Ultima Online. And so not only did the solo player Ultimas, I think, really begin and repeatedly set the standard for solo player gaming in content, in packaging, in presentation methods. Then Ultima Online really opened up massively multiplayer gaming. But really then, at least from my perspective, I've gone quiet.
Right.
And if you look at most other role-playing games are in the vein of EverQuest to World of Warcraft.
Right.
They're all about leveling up.
Yeah.
Every player of most of those games is first and foremost a combatant. They might also have some crafting they can do on the side, but they're all combatants.
Right.
Whereas if you look at Ultima Online, Ultima Online, most people were combatants, but lots of people never entered combat. They were blacksmiths as a profession. They were shopkeepers as a profession. They were fishermen as a profession. And few games are really doing that now. And so that's what I wanted to bring back. And so now, with the new game that I'm working on called Shroud of the Avatar, I've gotten back into doing exactly my base work again. So first I started to draw the world myself. We then did a brief implementation of that, realized the scale was off, and I made a higher resolution map down to each individual tile is explicitly positioned and described by me in the story that I'm developing. We've already begun to create the cloth maps. Here's the first 3, produced myself by hand, of the new world. And I'll later get a chance to show you a demo of this too, and you'll see that it is precisely the game.
Did you silk screen those at home? Or
well, these are iron-on transfer. But yeah, so these are the first ones, just so I could see how it was coming out in cloth and see how I like the color and the texture and other things, just as we begin to evolve it. So even though we are actually doing this game as a digital download, and I believe it is a reinvention of role-playing in the sense of it is neither strictly speaking solo player, nor is it strictly speaking an MMO. It's a game you can play offline solo as much as you wish, so you can play it like a solo player game. But if you are online, it plays ad hoc multiplayer, meaning it's not like a first-person shooter you launch a server and play together.
Right.
It, in real time, brings people into the world with you whom you know or nearby you have some other common thread with you.
Sure.
So I think it's a new type of role-playing game, but still harkens back very strongly to the tradition that I set in my previous work.
Role-playing games are a weird kind of genre now, because so much of the various elements that were once just part of a role-playing game experience are now in all these other different genres. What would you define as a hardcore RPG at this point?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that even a lot of first-person shooters are beginning to some role-playing elements in it. And even though these two words, I don't mean the same thing literally, but I use them somewhat differently. There's role-playing, in quotes, and there's an RPG. And to me, an RPG, a great RPG, would be something like Diablo. Diablo is a great RPG. It's a great game about challenge and reward cycles and leveling up and wading through monsters and sneaking through dungeons and collecting treasure. Wonderful RPG. But to me, it's not a role-playing game.
Right.
Something like Thief was a great role-playing game, because you're encouraged to play the role of a thief, and the better you play that role well, the more success you have in that game.
And the mechanics are geared towards one kind of experience.
That particular one is a role of a thief. You can try to make ones that let you play multiple roles, but the point is you're playing your success or failure depends on how well you play the role of a thief.
Got it.
But I think there's actually very few explicitly role-playing games out there right now.
Name some.
Well, I would say Skyrim is probably one of the best out there in recent years, and has a lot of both facets of what I really like. It has a lot of the RPG elements, but it also has a lot of role in it,
right.
And so that's I think one of the best. Whereas as much as I love, I've been a big Warcraft player, World of Warcraft player in the past, but it also falls back into my mind in that RPG category.
Right, because it doesn't necessarily drive you to
consider your role. All you're really trying to do is min-max your damage over time and your path through the level grind.
Right. So
more or less. I mean, I'm not knocking the game, by the way. I love it. I've played a lot of it myself. It's a great game.
But it sounds like there's a lot of, dramatic consideration too, right? There's a certain kind of idea about how your character should act in the world that differentiates the two terms for you.
For me, and the thing that differentiates what I like to do in role-playing games from, say, Thief, in Thief, it's you are playing the role of a thief. If you were to play a Conan game, for example, you should win or lose based on how well you embody Conan. So how much you worship Kroll or wherever
how much lamentation.
Yes, exactly. What happens to the lamentation of the women there is
right.
before you. But the thing I like is I'm a big believer in two things that are my biggest inspirations. One is Tolkien and his backstory creation, deep, long before he creates the surface story that you get a chance to participate in. And I think that makes a world realistic and believable and easy to suspend your disbelief. And
sure.
So I like to believe that I can do that with reasonable skill. At least I try. The other thing is I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Yeah.
But in my mind, the stories or movies in the linear sense that mean the most to you are often because you see something of yourself in it. It means something to you. It reflects on the current issues in society. Even if it's Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, there has to be something that speaks to you personally and speaks to the human condition that's contemporary. And so the way I accomplish that is I say the role I want you to play is you. So I not only create a fiction that allows you to find your way into my world, a gateway of some kind that lets you come there, but once you're there, you're not playing Conan the Barbarian. I don't even want you to have multiple characters. I'm not going to have you have a good fighter and an evil wizard you can switch back and forth between.
Right.
This is you. You're always responsible for your decisions. You don't get multiple characters, and there's not really classing structure in it. When you're in, if today you would like to explore and learn some stuff about being a fighter, more power to you. If you'd like to learn more about some magic, more power to you. You never really have to start over and restart. You just kind of evolve your character as you see fit. Yeah. But that way, it's always you. And that way I can have the game judge you based on your actions, not the alter ego that you are embodying today.
So let's talk about development for Shroud of the Avatar. When did you decide I need to start making this kind of a game again? And where are you pulling your team from? What platforms are you building it on? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, so the motivation to build this game has been going on actually for some years. But the motivation is getting stronger and stronger, as time has gone by. I think one of the things that held me up for so long is for a long time I was really hopeful that I might find my way back to merging directly with the Ultima property again. But since those attempts never really that kind of held me away from it for a while. But now there's enough distance from it that I'm now resolved to build a whole new world, and frankly I did that one for 20 years, so it's time to build a new world regardless.
Good excuse for a fresh start.
Very good excuse for a fresh start. And so the team we put together is an interesting blend of I'd say a third of them are people that have worked with me in the past on Ultimas. A third of them are people that I've headhunted away from games and teams that I admire in nearby fields, often not role playing. And about a third of the team is, new greenhorns who some of them never even played an Ultima. I think that gives me a good blend of both people who think they know how it should be done and people who don't care how it was done and want to do something fresh. And so far, that's I think working out great.
And so your main target platform is PC.
PC, as you may know, I've always been a PC developer.
Sure.
Even in the rise and falls of all kinds of console platforms, I've always been a PC guy. I've just always liked the, not only the high resolution input of a mouse and a keyboard, but sitting close to the screen to feel like you're really through that portal into the world, compared to on the couch with a controller in the living room having a social experience on this side of the screen. I think the social experience is through the screen.
Interesting. Yeah.
That being said, as a gamer myself, I actually now do the majority of my personal gaming on tablets and mobile devices.
Right.
And so I'm very motivated to make sure that this game runs on a tablet just because I want it to play on a tablet.
Right.
And I also, by the way, think that's a super growing market. And so both from for personal reasons as well as business reasons, while first and foremost we were thinking this is a PC game,
So you're playing a lot of your own personal gamings on smartphones or tablets now. What's your crack? What are you hooked to?
Oh, it's really funny. I'm on my cell phone, which since I fly back and forth from Austin, Texas to New York so much now, I'm playing offline on my cell phone as much as any time else. I am a tower defense type game player. My favorites, my perennial favorite is still Plants vs. Zombies. It's been for like 3 years. It's been my go back to favorite every time they release a new patch. But I'm playing a lot of other things on my tablets now, like Kingdom Rush was one that I played a lot of recently.
Yeah.
And it was only a couple years ago when there was a game called Spider,
Yeah.
actually by a small developer back in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
That was the first game I saw on a mobile device that I said, not only do I just love this game so much to play it to completion, but it was the time that I said, finally, mobile gaming is going to work.
Right. That was a long time for you to be a doubter, because iOS gaming was already a couple of years old at that point.
Yeah, but the earliest games were Bejeweled clones and just things things that worked but just weren't what I would call super inspiringly fresh, and didn't really use the touch screen in a way that lets you think of it as an input device beyond a awkward virtual keyboard.
But I want to ask you about platforms because, as you mentioned, loving the PC, the screen being a portal into the world. You're also talking about a constituency that tends to be kind of rabidly anti-mobile. They don't like tablet gaming. They don't like smartphone gaming. What can you tell them about the game that's going to allay any fears they might have?
Sure. Well, I would still go back and say, look, I am still a PC developer,
Sure.
and so the place we are developing this game and the audience we are developing for is the PC market. I'm just saying that I want to be able to play it on a console. I mean, on a tablet. And what's interesting about that too is that even with my own team, who are doubters that this can be done, many of them, they're like going, well, Richard, if you want to, we can make an auction house that works on the tablet. And I'm going, sorry, no, that's really, it's only worth doing if it's really the full game, and we haven't hampered the game experience.
Right.
So
Not something tertiary.
Not something tertiary. So I'm devoted to trying it, and so far it seems to work that way. And I think a big part of why it will work is because we're making the game not just client server, but because it really is sort of a standalone, kind of a blended solo player, multiplayer experience. And so far it looks like we'll be able to pull this off. But PC is first and foremost the target.
Going back to the prehistory stuff, you mentioned being one of the first D&D players, and as I was prepping for this, one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was, what did Gary Gygax think of Ultima?
Oh, it's funny. I've met both Gary and Dave Varnes many, many years ago.
Yeah.
Long after I was writing games, however. And it's interesting to, I actually think right now today, pen and paper role playing is seeing a resurgence.
Yeah.
And it's had a resurgence, I think, kind of in the middle years, 15 years ago or so, and it's had at least 2 dips in the middle where it almost faded out entirely. And but during that first dip is when I met Gary and Dave. And so they, of course, would look across at computer games and go, we really need to be there. And it's a really interesting time to meet one of your heroes when they're struggling,
yeah.
and you seem to be doing something more relevant. Where on the other hand, I would look at that, and I actually still think to this day, as good as I think our computer games on, the audio-visual presentation in our games is phenomenal. We can do real-time rendering like a movie, cinematic. I mean, it's shocking what we can do in real time with easily available tools. On the other hand, I still think we still pale in comparison to the social experience of around-the-table pen and paper gaming when it's done at its best, which is rare. But pen and paper gaming at its best still beats computer gaming almost all the time from a certain kind of depth of quality.
So were you able to tell that to Gygax?
I tried to, but so that was my fanboy kind of talk, was to say,
Sure.
look, I still think there's something particularly special about the around the table stuff. But as those guys were also struggling to figure out how to contribute or how to move their success into the computing field, unfortunately that never really went well.
Yeah.
And I remember Dangerous Journeys, one of Dave Varneson was working on, and I remember looking at it and I'm going, he's clearly a great game designer, but it's just like when Chris Roberts, the author of Wing Commander, went off to go make movies. You're going like, okay, well, your skill is really in making games, not in making movies. Or I see writers try to move from writing linear prose to writing characters for games and interactive scripts, and I'm going, it just doesn't. A lot of these skills don't transfer. The only skill I've seen that really transfers well is 3D modeling for the computer art. But a lot of the script writing and other things really just isn't as transportable as you might think.
It's funny you mentioned Chris Roberts. We had him here a little while back to talk about his new game, and the commonalities I'm seeing between both you guys is that you're making the game bigger and more layered, right? It's not just this kind of, all right, you're out in space doing all these dogfights. You're not just adventuring. You can have a slower, more nuanced kind of experience. Is that by virtue of getting older?
No, I think it has to do with tenure. If you look back at what we did in our youngest days, and what most people are doing in their now youngest days, the new people in the industry, and I'll cast it in role-playing versus space combat. If you look at most every role-playing game, the plots are the same as my first few games, which are, you open up the box, you boot it up, and you are told you are the great hero.
Yeah.
All right, I'm the great hero. Your job is to level up in this game until you are mighty enough to defeat the bad guy. And by the way, usually along that route, you're you're not being the good guy. You're stealing, and you're doing whatever the maximizing your power is. And if that's to exploit the masses, you do that. And then the bad guy, who's done nothing bad through the whole game, because he's just waiting on the final level for you. And so this bad guy who for some reason you're going to go kill, you make it onto his level and you kill him, and ta-da, you win. And you're going like, okay, I did that story once, I did that story twice. Okay, I get it. I can make that story, and I get that, yeah, this time the graphics are going to be better, and I can make more smoke effects or bangs and buzzes or whistles, but come on, surely there's got to be more to life than shooting.
Right.
And so I don't think it has to do with calendar age. I think it has to do with how many iterations you've done this.
Got it.
And what I find interesting about our industry is there have been these inflection points, like the existence of the internet, or the CD-ROM drive, or 3D rendering hardware. And every time one of those things happens, gameplay resets back to just to run around and shoot things, because it's way more beautiful than it was last time. Or I can now do it with multiplayer compared to last time.
Yeah.
But whenever the technology is a little bit more stable, people go like, okay, I've shot things enough, let's have a deeper experience until the next reset. And but having been through 3 or 4 of those resets, I'm just not interested in resetting anymore. So when a reset happens, the games that are most popular are simple and not necessarily mine. As the processing goes up, our ability to communicate subtlety and emotion technologically will improve. But I still think we've done, there's very few people working on what's behind that. What emotion you're trying to show, and why is that character sad? It's not enough to show that the character's crying. Yes, it's a really good looking crying now compared to the way it was, and getting over that uncanny valley of, the robotics uncanny valley of you can get really close and then it looks bad, and then it's difficult to get across that last step to where it looks accurate. And it'll be a very powerful and important moment when we do. And games will become simple again, because they'll just run around and shoot each other and make them cry. But to add reason to care about the person crying is the part that I find a more interesting challenge. Yeah,
motivation. So you've been to space.
I have. Number 483.
You're 483rd person to go into space.
Yes.
I didn't realize they were keeping track, but of course they probably are, right?
When there's only 500, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, lots of video games are set in space. What is something that you feel video games get wrong about space that can be easily fixed?
Well, there's a lot of things that get wrong about space, but the easy to fix is the hard one.
Right.
Because
you have to make it adventurous, and you can't. Yeah. The nuts and bolts you necessarily can't necessarily work into a game, because it'd be, quite frankly, boring.
Right. Well, in fact, that's sitting in a space capsule before launch for 4 hours was incredibly exciting. But to simulate the same thing in a video game would completely suck. But what was interesting, though, there were a couple of differences of launch and reentry compared to expectation from watching TV. On TV, or frankly standing outside by a launch, it is violent, loud, dangerous, noisy, exciting. On the inside, when you're going through the checklist and you get to the point where the engine's light, you hear nothing.
Really?
You feel nothing.
Yeah.
When you get to the point where it's liftoff, you feel nothing. Because the engines have been slowly throttling up, and as soon as the thrust is greater than the mass of the vehicle, it begins to rise, but only ever so slowly. And it only begins to slowly, as the engines continue to throttle up, the acceleration becomes more and more, and you slowly feel yourself push back in the seat. But it was completely serene. It feels like a confident ballet move lifting you into the sky compared to dropping the clutch on a sports car to off into space.
Right.
And so I was really shocked at how beautiful and serene the whole thing was. And the same thing's true for reentry. You hit the atmosphere going 17,000 miles an hour. As soon as you touch the upper atmosphere, it creates a plasma that envelops the vehicle and immediately begins to melt the heat shield, which you can see melting out the window, going past your window.
Oh, you can see that?
You can see it, yeah. But yet the forces, there's still not enough drag to even push you in your seat. So it's just a light show out the window as the vehicle is literally melting around you, perfectly silent, melt away of you, and my shoulder was right against the window. This distance from my shoulder is a plasma furnace hotter than the surface of the sun, and as the vehicle melts away, it's completely surreal.
It's funny because re-entry is always portrayed as this violent shaking, like
the only violence ever is when the parachutes deploy, and then there's like at the end of a whip being cracked briefly. And then it settles out, and it's back to being quiet and serene again.
So space travel should be more peaceful in video games.
It is. It's actually very elegant.
That's nice. Now I want to go. Maybe next time you head up there.
Yeah.